Alright, this isn't new. Sacrificing historical accuracy for quote-unquote entertainment is a tale as old as tales.
Nope.
It's not just when it comes to movies and books and such. Exaggerating the details of a story is a common practice. Generally, when a person exaggerates a story, it's in order to ensure the entertainment factor is at its highest possible.
Frogs!
But that isn't always the primary goal of a storyteller.
Stone Valor!
That's a whole other topic. For now, let's focus on storytelling itself. When a writer is writing a retelling of a past story, in general, we'd assume that you're telling the actual story of the historic figure or historic event. I mean, why tell a story about history if the history itself is not interesting enough on its own without needing exaggeration? But there are cases where telling a fictional story connected to real events is completely fine. One great example of this is the movie 1917. The characters and the story itself is completely fictional, but the setting that they are in and the art direction which aids in understanding the setting of the film are stellar. Here, the storyteller leveraged a real historical event in the past to tell a fictional story that fits this world quite well. This video isn't about this though. I wish I could tell you that storytellers have the decency to keep historical events as accurate as possible to relay the correct information to its audiences, but it seldom is the case.
But the Imitation Game portrays Alan Turing in a way that seems at odds with how he's described by people who actually knew him. He's portrayed as incapable of working with a group, his poor social skills pissing everyone else off. They also show him as being literal-minded, sarcasm blind, and unaware of this alien concept known as joking around. In reality, while he preferred working alone, he got on very well with his colleagues, knew perfectly well what a joke was, and was seen as quite witty and charming by everyone around him. Hell, even the tragic ending showing Alan's forced chemical castration leaving him so shaken he commits suicide leaves out the fact that, while the drugs he was forced to take were horrific, they didn't make his hand shake, or leave him unable to think. His colleagues actually say that he was in good enough spirits, and the ruling was even questioned because of this. And the man was still making new discoveries in mathematical biology like a boss? Why the hell wasn't that shown?
But also to show how his homosexuality inspired his work. And I think even in the title, The Imitation Game, the scene where we explain that in the film is all about how his homosexuality inspired and created the technological world we know and appreciate today.
There are tons of examples of historical movies that completely change entire events in order to cater to the story's effectiveness. I mean, it's fairly easy to name movies off of memory that do so to anyone who's seen any films.
The screenwriter got an Oscar.
And what's the problem with this approach? I mean, it's just a film. Its main goal isn't to tell an accurate historical story, but rather to entertain its audiences with a well-paced, cut-down version of history so that it achieves maximum entertainment.
When asked to respond to such historical fact-checkers, Scott was blunt in his response: "Get a life."
Ooh, you're hard.
Well, I'm here to tell you that this perspective is wrong. Although it definitely is my opinion that stories that are based on historical events and figures which sacrifice historical accuracy are bad from the get-go. My reasons for judging these stories as bad is based on objective issues. As with my Underdogs video, I will be referencing several pieces of media to prove my point. So to anyone who hasn't seen these, you have been warned. Spoilers are abound. So, when we mention historical accuracy, we need to mention controversial historical facts. Since history hasn't been seen by a lot of the people that are alive today, historians are bound to disagree about historical events. Generally, as a historian, you are looking for direct sources to gain your historical knowledge. That includes written works by different people, archaeological sites.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa!
That's too damn bad!
Then, when you are not looking too far back, people that are alive today who recall the events. Unfortunately, since people are usually chock full of their own biases and preconceived notions, as a historian you need to take in a lot more sources before you assume the truth. The gold mine would be something like a historical event that has been written about by two or more separate unconnected individuals in the past. You hear that, Christians? The great flood occurred all over the earth in order to kill everyone? How then do you explain different cultures writing about it? Also, kangaroos? Regardless, historical accuracy from historians is something we need to acknowledge is not always very reliable. There are things we can be pretty sure about, For example, when governments of the past would write down government documents regarding someone's birth or someone's transgressions, fines and prison sentences and the like. So using context clues and several sources, we can deduce a lot about an individual or historical events from the past. We might not have an entire person's daily life mapped out, but we can definitely get a general outline and fill the gaps based on a culture or a person's profession. Like, for example, we know that Jack went to an arts university based on bank records that reflect the payment of tuitions. We also know that Jack painted some of the best art pieces ever when he was 19, according to his date of birth and the date on the paintings which are seen on the back of all of his canvases. Therefore, we can assume that paintings done when he was between the age of 18 and 22 were done at art school, and not after he graduated, even if the art pieces don't specify where they were made. Now, it isn't our job, both as writers and laymen, to map out a person's history. Thankfully, there are people who are paid very mediocre salaries to do that. All we need to do is read a book written by an overworked historian to figure out what we are looking for, or more realistically, watch a YouTube video on the matter. So, having the knowledge we do about someone's life, how do we ensure the accurate retelling about this story? Considering that the book itself fills this purpose in the first place and honestly does so much more accurately and reliably. Well, cutting out information wouldn't be that big of an issue, so let's do so.
I got bitches all around my ride, drinking every day.
Say we want to write a feature-length film about Beethoven's life. Well, we need to introduce our character. We need to introduce the people around him, and we need to introduce his position in society. That means that showing Beethoven's siblings would be a helpful step in progressing his story. Now, we don't have to show all of his siblings, especially the ones that died soon after birth. This is a case where cutting out key parts of a person's history is perfectly okay. You wouldn't cut out Caspar. His brother, although quite a failure in many ways, was also instrumental in shaping Beethoven's life down the line with his terrible decisions. Caspar was, in every sense of the word, a loser.
Failure!
Being the younger brother of Beethoven and being a music teacher and composer that no one liked, he had to be supported by Beethoven. After he failed at these pursuits, he began representing Beethoven as an agent and assistant. Thing is, Caspar was so vulgar that several publishers were quite sick of dealing with him. He was so bad that he ended up selling 3 piano sonatas to a publisher after they were promised to be handed over to another publisher by Beethoven beforehand, which led to a quarrel between the brothers. Understandably so. So let's have him in the film. We can create quite the scenes where Beethoven keeps having to support and aid his brother with basic life skills while Caspar keeps messing things up for the both of them. This could also inform a big part of Beethoven's life. The court case against Caspar's wife, Johanna. I know, quite convenient, but that's her actual name. As Beethoven didn't like her considering her horrible past of, well, thieving, staging a robbery, blaming the robbery on a servant, having an illegitimate child, which is kind of dumb as a term. I mean, the child's right there. Regardless, Beethoven being not quite fond of this woman and Caspar for some reason wanting to marry her is ripe for some drama in our film. So let's do it. Let's have a scene where Beethoven and Caspar fight over him marrying her. This could also easily introduce Karl Beethoven, which was Caspar and Johanna's son, the kid that Beethoven took custody of for his protection in order to secure Karl's future, considering that Caspar died of tuberculosis when Karl was 8. And since Caspar initially named Beethoven as the sole guardian of Karl and 2 days before his death added that he hoped that both Beethoven and Johanna would be at peace to raise the child together. Well, considering her history, it's pretty understandable why Beethoven would want her to stay as far away from Karl as possible. I mean, the lady had another illegitimate child in 1820 after she lost the custody battle with Beethoven. Lady can't keep it in her pants. Beyond that, we can also explore Karl's story, who, like his father, was quite the disappointment. From one end, it is understandable that an 8-year-old would be attached to his mother, but from another end, it is quite another act to be rude and abusive to servants at the age of 11. And to be lazy and inconsiderate of his uncle's care for him. Beethoven remained caring and considerate of his adopted child even after Karl would steal.
It has been noted that Karl was considered to be lazy and dishonest. It was reported in December 1818 that Karl had been abusive to one of his uncle's servants and had stolen money. Despite the teenager's unruly behavior, his uncle retained a faithful and affectionate care for him. In a letter dated the 17th of May 1825, he prefaced the letter to Karl with, "My son," and signed it with, "Your good and faithful father."
Like mother, like son. Karl attempted, unalive, after he told his uncle he wanted to join the military, to which Beethoven was angrily against. Understandably so, since Beethoven hated Napoleon and his harmful conquests. After his attempted unaliving, Beethoven allowed his nephew to join the military, but died shortly after his deployment, where Beethoven left Karl his entire estate. Okay, with all this history in mind, I hope a lot of people are inspired and ready to enjoy a great film about Beethoven's life. Let's just put all this information into the story emulation of media extraction and nullification, and crank.
Ludwig was a woman hater. Look at how he behaved with Johanna.
What?
I have had lovers, but that is not a crime.
How?
Beethoven's objection to his brother's marriage was based more on Johanna's reputation than her means. She was, it appears, generous with her favors before her marriage, and it is probable this did not change after she became Karl's wife. It is said she gave birth within months of Karl's death, and given his illness it is unlikely he was the father. She became pregnant again in the spring of 1820, nearly 5 years after Karl's death, by a finance counselor named Johann Hofbauer. Beethoven was appalled by Johanna's immorality and frequently ran her down both in conversation and letters. He used her reputation, as well as her conviction for stealing money from her husband, cf. Karl van Beethoven, against her in the long legal process over custody of her son, Karl.
Uncle.
Huh?
Due to the suicide attempt, Karl was recommended for religious counseling and admitted to a hospital. Following his release in September, he was allowed by his uncle to travel to Bohemia for military service. A month before he left for duty, his uncle's health deteriorated. Karl stayed by his bedside throughout December 1826.
We must talk. I can no longer skulk around like a guilty schoolboy.
Why?
Though he accepts rumors that Beethoven was in love with her were put about by Johanna herself, causing Beethoven to write in a letter, And yet what talk we had to listen to about fine clothes, of which Frau Beethoven has accused me, and on a former occasion the statements that I was supposed to be in love with Frau Beethoven, and so forth. Is that kind of talk suitable for a guardian, or, to put it more plainly, do those people indulge in that kind of tittle-tattle?
How does this entire history end up being showcased as Johanna is this poor mother who was judged poorly, Caspar is some romantic abused brother, Karl is some sort of abused surrogate son, and Beethoven actually was romantically involved with Johanna? What? The IMDb description defines this film as, the composer once wrote a famous letter to a nameless beloved, and the movie tries to find out who this beloved was. If that was my only introduction to this film, I wouldn't have any problem with it. Why not try to decipher who she was by trying to find someone in his life and writing a story about it? Sounds quite fun actually. But then you make one of his main lifelong enemies his lover, behind the back of his brother, which he took great care of? Can you say it with me? Character assassination.
Get back up. Always get back up.
On top of that, you have their problems being caused by a letter that was somehow missed by this lady looking at a plate that clearly has a letter on it. How convenient that two people that are so in love don't try to, ask each other where the other was? Why does Johanna then jump on Casper's candlestick before she asks Beethoven what happened? Why does Beethoven assume that she hates him instead of, she got sick? Or, she got stuck on her way there the way he did because it was raining and muddy? God damn it, this film was so dumb. And it's unfortunate because the acting is so good. The actors did a phenomenal job of conveying just the dumbest storytelling imaginable. Now, why does having a character be completely misinterpreted cause me so much anger versus completely annulling other characters' roles in the story, such as Beethoven's dead siblings, or Beethoven's other brother who was played by a fat man only interested in making money off of Beethoven's estate, while in reality he reportedly had bony fingers that barely fit in his gloves, and after his brother's death was seen overly enthusiastic towards his brother's works to the point where people assumed that he was lying about his interests, something that can't really be proven or otherwise, so assuming the better is probably not a problem here. These differences don't affect the perception of main and important characters such as Beethoven himself. Honestly, having his brother be a more pathetic and sympathetic person wouldn't affect the story that much, as compared to making people who were much more key figures in his story such as Karl and Johanna become completely unrecognizable compared to their real life counterparts. You need to remember what story you are telling, and if the story you are telling gets affected by the way you are telling it, it's a problem, especially considering historical historical facts. Beyond that, I don't have much of an issue with the complete fabrication of the letter that claims giving ownership to his immortal beloved after it was already also fabricated to be given to his brothers, instead of what he actually did, which was give all of what he owns to Karl, his adopted son. Until you realize the reason that he was not given everything Beethoven owned in the movie was so that we see Beethoven as this abusive monster who tortured this kid and didn't allow him to be by his mother. You know, the criminal mother who was bailed out because people felt bad for her, not for the victims that she left behind. And look, I don't want it to seem like Beethoven was this amazing person. He definitely was a bad person in many ways, but he was surrounded by so many horrible people with no direction in life who parasitically lived either off of him or his family who benefited from him. Johanna even asked Beethoven for money in 1824, which she sorta did by giving her half of her widow's pension, which was meant to be used to finance Karl's education. He was 18 at the time, by the way, just to let you know. So, the base issue with this distortion of reality is the disrespect that it shows to the people who came before us. The people we are benefiting from to this day by reselling their name as if we have full ownership over their lived experiences. I mean, imagine if a person was completely substituted for another person in some other film. That would be equivalent to saying that a person's life achievements were not really theirs, as if their hard work didn't earn them the respect that they are owed, and rather this completely fabricated person now earns the respect and admiration someone else is owed because we want them to. Well, as it turns out, they did! Copying Beethoven is a film that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but when it comes to recognizing people in history who did something amazing to aid someone else, it is a failure in every sense. For some reason, this movie decided that it would be a good idea to replace a real person in history, Karl Holz, a friend of Beethoven's who was a violinist, with some woman called Anna Holz, who never existed. Thing is, the movie explores a gray area in Beethoven's life. On the premiere of his 9th symphony, since he was deaf, violinist Joseph Bologne stated that conducting was actually primarily from someone else, although it's not mentioned who that primary conductor is, and Beethoven was copying them in order to keep in time. If it was the case or not, what we do know is that he had to be shown that he was receiving applause, meaning that he was completely deaf, and his conducting was nothing more than a performance for the audience, even if they knew about his ailment. Replacing Karl Holz with some woman is just insulting, and I find it personally to be a slight against his character.
Sexism!
How dare you say that? You have a problem with a woman replacing a man because she's a woman. If it were a man, you wouldn't complain. Thanks for the segue, I was hoping for one. Thor 1 from Marvel introduces us to the world of the 9 realms. This is related, I swear. I mean, it kind of does introduce to us some realms, not 9, but it does introduce to us the worlds that we need to pay attention to. Asgard, Midgard, or Earth, and Jotunheim. Now, the one character that matters in this video is Laufey, the mother of Loki.
Their king fell. Laufey's son.
Excuse me, the father of Loki. Wait, what? Why did the film change Laufey from a woman to a man? Why would you do that? Why not use Farbauti, Loki's actual father, and an actual giant instead of the Aesir mother of Loki? Thing is, copying Beethoven most likely used a woman in order to bolster some potential sort of female representation thing. Even though, I mean, if there is no useful difference between men and women, I don't get the point. She's an amazing artist. She's perfect in every way. She struggles from people judging her, yet she still gets the admiration of the person that we all consider to be a genius to this day. And I mean, if he thinks that she's perfect, then we are stupid not to believe him. And then when he dies, she will continue his legacy and become his greatest pupil. Ignore Karl and his endless hours on the pianoforte. It's Anna who's the real deal. But even though Laufey was made a man, I don't think it was because Marvel was aiming to increase the representation of men in movies. I think they wanted to create a race of only men because genociding a race of humanoid men is a lot more palatable than genociding a race of both men and women. They don't show you who the mother of Loki is in the film. We don't see any frost female giants, and all the males seem bad already. If they were accurately represented based on the state of affairs, which would be skinny, lanky, immortal, starving creatures, then Thor going to Jotunheim and killing a bunch of them would be something unforgivable, especially if you throw in women into the mix. And if you do throw in women, you will have to explain why there aren't any babies and children running about either. All this to say that Laufey was made a man because killing a woman is a lot more of a struggle for sexist audiences to tolerate, and that Farbauti is a much harder name to pronounce, even though it sounds cooler. That being said, I think that Laufey being made of Jotnar is not that big of an issue compared to Karl Holz.
Sex! Fascism!
She was a woman. Okay, calm down. Here's why. Karl was a real person. Karl lived a life and achieved things that are meaningful to the world, so much so that we remember his name. Lao Fei never existed. She is as real as Jeebus. So making Jeebus a trans man wouldn't be a problem. So with that in mind, when you want to make changes in history, you need to recognize what you're changing. Are you making a completely new person and attributing someone else's achievements to them? That is morally wrong, because what you are effectively saying is that this person's existence is a convenience that I get to ravage. Your life is one that I care so little about that I will take what I want and not cite you as the main source for what I consider meaningful. Let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say you were writing a story of Tu Yuyu. Yeah, that's her real name. She is a Chinese pharmaceutical chemist and malariologist. Studies malaria and all that. So she was appointed along with a lot of other researchers during the Vietnam War to find a cure for malaria that wasn't chloroquine, because it was resistant to it. Somehow. She, on her own, came up with a cure by testing tons of Chinese herbs and finding one that was actually effective against malaria. She also devised the correct way to extract the pure form of the cure by consulting some ancient Chinese healing book that mentioned not boiling the herbs. She then was the first to test the cure safety on herself, as she found it to be her responsibility since she came up with it. And then she was given the Nobel Prize for her amazing cure that helps tons of people in developing countries to this day. So imagine, in your movie, Tu Yuyu was replaced by some random man called Tom Yuyu, and her story was told exactly the same.
How dare you!
Why? The movie's about her. Why would you make it her man? Well, copying Beethoven is about Karl Holz. Why did you change him? Why did you replace him with some random person? If it would be considered offensive to lie about Tu Yuyu's story of triumph and genius, then why would it be any less offensive to change the story of Karl? Is it because it was a long time ago? That's not the case either. Can you replace Cleopatra with a man and tell the same story?
No.
Why not? It's been a long time. I mean, it's been at least 10 years, right? Since Cleopatra was a thing. So come on, just move on, guys. Thing is, stories that change a historic person's sex or race or so on would be considered disrespectful. Don't think so? Make a film where Martin Luther King is white. I dare you.
I double dare you, mother.
Same cause, same message, same sentiment, but he's white. Or Japanese even. It won't fly. Hell, what about a film where Black Panther is white? Why is that a problem? Wakanda is a people, not a place. Why couldn't a white person be a king in Wakanda? Isn't Wakanda the most advanced civilization? To my understanding, advancement means more diversity, no? But that won't happen. Hell, they won't touch African or Middle Eastern issues with a 10-foot pole, so they have to focus on American kids as if they have it bad. What else is there to say? Well, I haven't told you about the worst one yet, but I still won't. Give me some time. This is a topic that is quite vast and has so many examples I can talk for ages. Anyways, here's another example. One that actually made me question my position on the matter quite a bit. So you know it's a good one. Chernobyl. What a show. Genuinely one of the best short form shows ever made. The pacing, the acting, the story, the editing. This show seriously deserves utmost praise. Watching it, I truly felt the weight that is radiation. The invisible force that kills so quickly and quietly, ever present and ever oppressive. Imagine trying to defend yourself from what you can't see, and any error leads to your death. Radiation is a thing of nightmares, and honestly, it's so well captured in this show that there was a weight looming over the viewer through the entirety of it, as it looms over the rest of the characters within it. We share their burdens, even though, like them, we can't see the threat. Yet, that is what makes it all the more horrifying. It isn't easy, but this show pulled it off with flying colors. I watched it in one sitting, watching every episode with glee, and being unable to stop. By the court scene, I was so engaged that I had forgotten the time and had missed my school bus. No, that didn't happen, I'm an old man, but I did ruin my sleep for a few days for this show. As the credits rolled over the final scene, I sat back and started to wonder which would be the better show, Chernobyl or Breaking Bad? I got my answer pretty quickly though. After the show ends, you get this piece of text.
Legasov was aided by dozens of scientists who worked tirelessly alongside him at Chernobyl. Some spoke out against the official account of events and were subject to denunciation, arrest and imprisonment. The character of Ilana Komiuk was created to represent them all and to honor their dedication and service to truth and humanity. The character of Ilana Komiuk was created to represent them all and to honor their dedication and service to truth and humanity.
Are you kidding me? You replaced dozens of fucking scientists who risked their fucking lives and reputations at the hand of the Soviet fucking Union with this random bitch that never fucking existed in the first fucking place? Okay, calm down. Think of your monetization. Maybe this video will get me to 1,000 subs. Calm down. This is perhaps the biggest insult I have ever seen in media form ever. You take dozens of scientists, ignore their individuality, and then pretend that some OC is a suitable replacement. Piss off, you crap show. Well, what were they supposed to do? Have dozens of characters? How would that work? Did you even try? Why not have a boardroom of nameless scientists? You had a boardroom of nameless politicians. Was that so hard? Well, potentially. I spent some time in the past trying to find the scientists' names that were not mentioned in the show, by the way. And now that I've tried again, I just can't find any of them. If you look for scientists that were denounced by the Soviet Union for their outspokenness, you would find nothing. No matter what I try, they are nowhere on the internet as far as I can tell. Maybe someone else could find this information, and I'm sure it's somewhere, and based on this information, you could pick the ones that matter the most. For example, some who got denounced, and some who were the most senior and brilliant, and represent them and ignore the rest. But what if that information was nowhere? Easy. Don't have them be there. It is quite clear that Legasov was the main force behind solving this issue. He had all the knowledge. He had all the science, and he was the one who could have done it alone. At the end, mentioning that he was aided by others wouldn't be as big of an insult, considering you are not telling me that some random lady is equivalent to potentially hundreds of scientists, some of which were women, by the way. Get your head out of vaginas for a second and think about this objectively. But isn't it equally as offensive to make it seem like Legasov was capable of doing the whole thing alone? No, and here's why. Even if he wasn't able to, he existed. If Olana was a female scientist among the hundreds, I wouldn't have an issue. I would wonder why her, of all people, but it would have been a lot more forgivable. OCs don't have a place in history. Keep them out of stories that are meant to be representative of actual events, and treat real people with the respect they deserve. Now, it's not like Chernobyl was chock full of accuracies otherwise. I mean, the over-the-top dramatization of how bad the nuclear meltdown was going to be is a bit cringe. Really, the disaster was a disaster for that area only. Beyond that, Europe would be completely fine, so calm down. But thing is, this doesn't cause any issues when it comes to representation, because the disaster was a disaster to the people involved. Adding some extra danger that is related to the primary one, that had to be solved anyways, isn't a problem, since it wouldn't change the outcome of the actions of the characters. Another one is that Legasov would have lived in a better house than where he did, even after his denunciation. But again, how big his toilet is inconsequential when it comes to the story of Chernobyl. It was done for effect. Like, look how this brilliant scientist is treated by his government. How bad Soviet Union. Now, this was the issue I had. I don't like having real people be replaced by some OCs that writers fantasize about being there. Either represent them accurately or write them out when you can. In this case, you could, because the face of the operation was Legasov, so writing them out is completely viable. That being said, I did notice the hypocrisy when it came to the killing dog scenes. Later in the show, we get introduced to Bacho, Garo, and Pavel. Bacho is shown to be a remorseless veteran of the military who's seen a lot. Garo isn't very well characterized, but from what we see, he is similar to Bacho, and Pavel is an unqualified newbie to the job. They are all stationed to kill pets that were left behind, since they were irradiated and could lead to the irradiation of people who try to take them in. In general, all animals near the disaster site had to be exterminated for the safety of the world. We are shown through the eyes of the newbie how his experience shook him to his very core, killing loving pets who, although they didn't deserve such a cruel fate, had to be put down for their own sake and the sake of the country. Through these scenes, we learned that Bacho has a soft spot for dogs, and although he threatens Pavel with his death, he was only bluffing in order to keep the suffering of the animals to a minimum. He loves these animals, but he has to do what must be done in order to keep the country safe. Now, these people did exist, but not these individual characters. The actual liquidators did do what we see in the show. They did kill pets in order to keep the country safe, and they most definitely had a tough time doing so, considering the weight of shooting defenseless creatures that cared about humans. So is this replacement of the liquidators with different people that never existed a problem? I mean, it's the same thing, isn't it? Replace a group of people with one person, or a small group of people, and attribute to them actions that were done by different people. I should have a field day with this. Well, here's the thing. Although I would have preferred to have real liquidators who actually existed, the goal of the scene is not to offer some sort of person who achieved so much. Rather, it's to relay an experience that was so painful to the audience.
You are coping and seething.
I will stand by my position of real people is better than OCs, but in this case, it's not the same as Ulana, who replaced characters that were a lot more impactful to the story, and was given a much greater role than she deserved, considering the weight that scientists played in aiding Legaslov in solving the disaster. I will admit that I am reaching a bit when it comes to supporting one side over the other, but again, when I'm looking at the accuracy of history, I'm also looking at the weight of the impact that these characters have, especially when they are replacing real people who deserve this recognition. So Pavel's creation is not that big of an issue compared to Ulana's creation.
Yes, you're coping.
Again, would prefer if Pavel was real instead of made up. In this case, the story was not about killing dogs, the story was about solving Chernobyl. Right? And so the historical accuracy when it comes to that is more important than the historical accuracy of some tertiary issues that were happening that were also impactful but not as important. So that's it then. Make characters accurate to their history, keep their stories real. Cut out parts that are inconsequential to the point of the story you are telling. When the history is not there to fill the gaps, ignore it. Because acting as if someone completely fictional is an adequate replacement to the role that a historically impactful person played is insulting. Right. I hope I never actually have to see anyone I care about face this. You know, lying about their story, pretending as if there was something they're not, completely lie about their struggles, and pretend they didn't achieve greatness through their hard work. I'm obviously building towards something, aren't I? You smart viewer, you. Well, who is this penultimate example that pisses me off so much? Who is this example of a historical figure that made me quit watching the travesty of a film they received 20 minutes in? What film, pretending that its pathetic retelling of one of my hero's stories is adequate enough for me to swallow down like it's a tasty bowl of chicken soup, instead of what it actually was, which was piss and puke soup with poop shavings on top. Now that's a vivid image, isn't it? I'm not being hyperbolic here. This film, subjectively, felt like pulling out nails and teeth at the same time. This film was so offensive to me that I quit watching it 20 minutes in. This film was so unbelievably objectionable, distasteful, repugnant, obnoxious, off-putting. Thank you, ChatGPT, for all these synonyms. I am of course talking about the film Le Chevalier, or just Chevalier, a retelling of the story of Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Genuinely one of my heroes, a person of such amazing strength and skill, such astonishing talent, such unbelievable achievement at a time when his work and skill would have not been recognized if it was average. A master fencer, taught at a young age to compete in the sport, surpassing so many of his peers so quickly that he was recognized as a master at the age of 15. According to Antoine Le Bossier, at 15 his progress was so rapid that he was already beating the best swordsman, and at 17 he developed the greatest speed imaginable. After which he was challenged by the then best swordsman in Europe, Alexandre Picard, who called him a mulatto, which is a racist term by the way. Unfortunate for Picard though, he lost within a few seconds of the bout, and thus Joseph's loving father, Georges Bologne, bought him a horse and buggy, which is equivalent to buying your son a Lamborghini today. And let's not skimp on Georges Bologne, his father. Although he was already married to another woman and had a daughter with her, he loved Joseph's mother, Nanon, a slave he owned that worked at his plantation in Guadeloupe. He loved her so much that he would be seen in public with her without any shame or attempt to hide the fact. He loved his son so much that he gave him his name, an act that wasn't commonplace at all considering that the amount of illegitimate children that slave owners had with their slaves through the years who never saw their mothers again after they were born. After Joseph graduated from fencing academy, he was recognized as the best swordsman in Europe and was given the equivalent of a knighthood by King George, or a gendarme du roi in Versailles. Nanon, by the way, was by her son the whole time, living in Paris. Joseph's father's last will and testament, written in 1765, left Joseph an annuity, which means he left him a series of payments to be made repeatedly on a regular basis of 8,000 francs, which to my best estimates, according to historicalstatistics.org, would be around $53,000. I don't know, someone correct me, because it's hard to find information on this currency. He also left Nanon an adequate pension. None of that would come to pass, however. As George died in 1774, his 2 plantations and his annuity was given over to his legitimate daughter, as French law didn't recognize his son as eligible to receive what his father left him, and so Joseph had to work for his living. That wasn't that big of an issue though, since in 1769, Joseph made his concert debut as a violinist in François-Joseph Gossec's new orchestra as a concertmaster, to the shock and awe of the Parisian public, since he was already famous for his fencing ability. You hear that? He was already famous, well known. He was beloved for his skills. A black man in the 1770s was widely recognized as an amazing swordsman and a Chevalier to the king. A black man was able to become one of the most widely recognized people in France for one skill. And just like that, he said, "Hold my beer," and showed the public his amazing musical talent as well. And amazing is what his musical abilities were. He was a prodigy and was taught quietly behind peering eyes. He was so beloved, in fact, that several composers dedicated several musical pieces to him, including François-Joseph Gossec and Karl Stamitz. In 1772, Joseph debuted as a soloist in the Concert des Amateurs, and in 1773, he became their conductor. Important to recognize was the public's perception of Joseph, which was overwhelmingly positive, recognizing his talents as especially impressive and impactful, especially with the lady folk. After the orchestra had to be defunded due to the financial situation in France, Joseph was able to reinstate it with the help of his friend Philippe d'Orléans, Duc de Chartres, another person who is worth researching if you want to find amazing people in history. I mean, he was a royal who believed in democracy. He initiated a women's march in Versailles and was an advocate for the French Revolution to end monarchical control of France. But regardless of his efforts to aid the downtrodden of France, he was still found guilty and sentenced to death by guillotine in 1793. An appalling example of how the far left eats itself. Quick tidbit, even though this isn't the point of this video, this very same issue will come back to haunt Joseph in the future. I hate both the far left and the far right for how stupid they are, but I have to say, the far right, as horrible as it is, has its principles, which are everyone else is impure, but our group, which will remain the same as the one that deserves special treatment for some BS reasoning that they came up with completely illogically. As with the far left, the issue is that it is cannibalistic by nature. Since the far left focuses not on intrinsic traits that you are born with like the far right does, but rather on oppression metrics that are constantly changing, you get Ukrainian farm owners arrested and killed in the Soviet Union after they were in support of the communist regime, even though they were unable to oppress anyone regardless of their owning land. And why you will get some rather embarrassing decisions from the French revolutionary powers in Joseph's life down the line. I hate both sides, but the far left is as damaging to itself as it is to everybody else. But with the far right, you at least get one group that is safeguarded, even if their reasoning for safeguarding this group is utter nonsense. That is what you saw with the modern left online, where further left ideologues turn on their supporters when they don't agree with some sort of ridiculous extension of their political dogma. I might do a deeper dive into this topic if there are no good videos on this topic online, because it's a hilarious issue that politics faces every couple years. Back to our main man. Joseph, after reinstating the orchestra, renamed it Le Concert Olympique. On a fateful night when he was walking back home, he was ambushed by a group, all of which he disbanded easily. Chaddiest Chad. Down the line, he joined the Revolutionary Army as a captain, yet he didn't stop giving concertos. Yet, although he was a black man who was supporting the revolution and abolishing slavery, he was arrested on September 29, 1793 and sentenced to death by the same group he supported, simply because he was friends with royals, a lot of which supported his notion of liberation and democracy. His actions of playing concertos was seen as non-revolutionary. What did I tell you about the left eating itself? Thankfully, after almost a year of imprisonment, he was released on the 24th of October, but after only a few years, he was arrested again, and then he was released a month later. He tried to rejoin the army in 1797 and wrote this petition. "I continue to show loyalty to the revolution. Since the beginning of the war, I have been serving with relentless enthusiasm, but the persecution I suffered has not diminished. I have no other resources, only to restore my original position." And he was still ignored. Say it with me now. Oppression. And at the hands of his comrades. Gotta love far left logic. Funnily enough, the revolutionary powers instated Napoleon as their general-in-chief. Yet in 1802 he reinstated slavery. Whoops. Saint-Georges lived in abject poverty after his second prison release, and fell ill during his 50s. He found solace only in playing the violin. Quote, "Towards the end of my life, I was particularly devoted to my violin. Never before did I play it so well." He was visited by his friend, Captain Nichon Duhamel, who, after finding him to be ill, took him in and cared for him until his death on June 9th, 1799, at 53 years of age. Never before has a loss been so great. So great, in fact, that to this day, Joseph Bologne's influence over the abolishing of slavery remains one that is mentioned to this day. No, it's not. No one knew about Joseph Bologne until this travesty of a film was released. I do not understand why he is not considered mandatory history. A man that showed the European European world that a black man can in fact be one that is talented, capable, and inspiring if given the rights that the rest enjoyed. His existence without a doubt was one that shook the Europeans' way of thinking to the core and led to the abolishing of slavery, which was reinstated by the very hands that abolished it through the dumbest decision making ever to be recorded in history. I hope you can see why Joseph Bologne is one of my heroes. He proves that through hard work and resilience anyone could achieve anything regardless of social pressures. He also proves that reason and logic was present even within the most rich aristocrats of France, which loved him for his skills and talent despite his skin color. The fact that he is not mandatory reading in schools is a spit in the face of both Le Chevalier and the general public. How much richer is your life now that you know that someone as opposed as Joseph Bologne was able to achieve so much? And then, in order to educate the public about this great man, you make this disgusting, unforgivable travesty of a film, this repugnant excuse for storytelling, this abortion of immeasurable magnitude. Stefani Robinson, Stephen Williams, you are the single Hollywood creators that I hate with immeasurable vitriol beyond the rapists and the pedophiles among you. You had a job, a responsibility to represent a historical figure that could only exist once, the most famous man in Europe at the time, a black man who got there using his strength and skills, his talent and passion, and you butchered it. You absolutely tarnished his image on screen for 1 hour and 48 minutes straight. The immeasurable damage you have created is disgustingly everlasting, and you should be ashamed at the prospect. Okay, now you might be thinking, what is so bad about the film? I mean, it introduces a historical figure that was forgotten by the masses. Isn't that a great first step at least? I mean, so what if they got some basic issues wrong? It's not that bad. Okay, here we go. I will limit the issues to the first 20 minutes because I will not be watching the rest of this farce. Don't worry, they did plenty in 20 minutes. They did so much that if it wasn't for them, this video would be over by now. Let's start with the opening scene, shall we? From the start, we have massive issues. Joseph Bologne walks into one of Mozart's concerts as an unknown and never heard of before violinist who challenges him to an epic duel. Mozart, being quite racist, finds this appalling and insults the Chevalier for his skin color. We already have huge issues here.
What the fuck is that?
Bologne was already countrywide famous for his fencing and violin skills by the time Mozart was a teenager. It was also posited that Mozart was inspired by Bologne's music. Although admittedly Mozart's music was better overall, Joseph's music is quite amazing to listen to. So go listen to it. It is doubly problematic because Joseph wouldn't do the disrespectful act of interrupting someone's musical performance by challenging him to a duel. He is a composer, he wrote music, and he would have respected any composer to finish their performance, especially considering that he faced this exact issue during his premiere of his first opera unfairly, because his music was quite great, but the audience was quite rude. Speaking of his music, did you know that they insulted him in this film in the first 0 minutes of his appearance by having Calvin Harrison Jr. portray him? Calvin is no violinist. His posture's messed up, his bow hold is terrible and tense, his bow is bouncing and sliding all over the place, his bow is overly tight and inaccurate to the time period, his left hand is terrible, he can't vibrato to save his life, his neck and shoulder are overly tense, and to add insult to injury, you make him play some BS jazzy out of tune nonsense?
Straight bow is paramount to quality sound production.
Nah, it'll be fine.
This classical composer, renowned for creating a new genre of classical music called Symphonie Concertante, where in several movements one or more solo instruments with contrast to full orchestra, is portrayed as some sort of jazz violinist. No hate toward jazz artists, I like a lot of your music, but how would you feel if Louis Armstrong was portrayed by some non-trumpeter who played some postmodern trumpet music? Having the portrayer of Joseph Bologne be a non-violinist is the utmost insult you could give to his legacy. Imagine, if you will, in the cinematic biography of Arnold Schwarzenegger, him being portrayed by some unathletic fat person. It's just as serious here. You don't give a role to a person who can't do the very thing that their character is amazing at. Afterwards, Mozart, who also can't play for shit, asks who he is. You know who he is. Everyone knows who he is. He is famous Europe-wide. Stop pretending to not know him. Then the film shifts into a rushed history of his life, without properly showing his training and ability. He is shown to be initially rejected at the school, only to be admitted for his violin skills. He didn't learn violin at the school of fencing and horse riding. That would be like learning gynecology at the School of Mathematics. Holy shit, this is dumb. Afterwards, we see the great fight between him and Picard, and he wins, to the great disappointment of this guy. I don't care who he is, I won't watch the rest of this train wreck to find out. We fast forward to some party where, again, it is made to seem that Mozart was more famous than Joseph and he is, again, insulted for his skin color. Black. Then some aristocrat woman gives him an opera composer position on the condition that he makes her the star or something. I don't care, moving on. Interestingly, his position is rivaled by another opera composer, Christophe Willibald Gluck. The position director of opera was given to Antoine Dauvain, and only after the racist leading ladies of the opera opposed having a mulatto be their director. Everyone else was happy to have him. That is why he was proposed in the first place, but those women had swaying power thanks to their positions and seniority in the opera. Gluck was actually a friend of Bologne's, whom he remained friendly with even after he abandoned composing instrumental music for the most part and focused on opera. Later, we are shown that George, his father, dies and gives his son his mother back as his property. This is so dumb. His mother was with him the whole time. George loved his son and loved Nanon. He never separated them. They were together in Paris the whole time, ever since Joseph turned 7. This is the film playing some BS neglectful and hateful father trope for some reason, instead of the reality. His mother enjoyed the privileges of being loved by a rich white person at the time, and his son did so as well. No one was left behind to struggle. Afterwards, there's some stupid scene where he describes the story of his opera to some woman, and I stopped watching after that. If you tell me that the story will get better afterwards, that somehow the film becomes amazing and historically accurate and Calvin somehow learns the violin and plays amazingly, I will never find out. I will not subject myself to the greatest insult known to man ever again. My hero, my idol, Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, reduced to this absurd, pathetic, unknown sex fiend. I hope you now see why I hate it so much. They took an accomplished, intelligent, courageous, talented, famous swear of opinions and turned him into a victim of the people whom the majority of them loved him, instead of the reality where his greatest woes came from the people like him, people who became social and political dictators and ate themselves as they always do. This is terrible and I hate it. Cease. Just cease your endless tirade against accuracy and respect the people who came before you. If we are telling their stories, it is because they were amazing. They were standout characters that are remembered for a reason. If you lie to the world about who they were and what they did, you are telling us that their achievements were not their own. Their lived experiences were no real importance beyond what we could pilfer for monetary gain. Keep in mind that we owe these people our modern world. Everything we know is thanks to their contributions to the world, whether directly or indirectly. We tell their stories because they were who they were, not because we want them to be something else. And if you can't keep that in mind, you shouldn't be writing historical retellings of people's lives, people's struggles, people's hopes and dreams, their sufferings and successes.
When asked to respond to such historical fact-checkers, Scott was blunt in his response. Get a life.
Leave them alone. Let the professionals do the work that you clearly are not fit to do, and let the audiences learn about them the way they were, not the way you envisioned them being. Historical movies play an important role in our society. They are the primary introduction of historical figures that were never taught in educational establishments, and thus they are some of the only ways anyone will learn about them. If your film fails at portraying reality, unfortunately many will believe your words and not look into the truth. Having a warped view of reality will only lead to further issues. Having an accurate image of history is one of the most important necessities in our world, and if you, as storytellers, give us the wrong ideas, then you are contributing to the never-ending torrent of misinformation and wrongfully attributed realities of our world. Never again. Keep reality real and keep fictions fictional. Maybe then I can watch over a more educated world as the God Emperor that I am, according to the film that I'm writing about my life right now, as a matter of fact. Spoiler alert, I'm also 6'10" and buffer than Jesus. I also have 90 Bugattis and 20 supermodel girlfriends, and on top of that I donate $30 trillion to charity every few seconds because I just have too much money. It weighs down my pocket. It's a real problem. To date, I've cured cancer, solved world hunger, and put an end to griefing in Minecraft. Coming to cinemas, the most successful man ever. Pick up your free tickets now because I'm so generous.